I remember to tell
And
people that.
so Sarah started recording, so start right now. Welcome, everybody. This is our second of two chats with the two at-large school board candidates for the school board here in Minneapolis. Joining me is Michael Dueñes, who is running for the at-large seat. So what I'll say quickly on the front of this, front of the recording is the goal of this is to have kind of a little bit more of an informal conversation with the candidates. We're going to be asking questions. There have been two other forums that will happen. We'll post links to those forums along with this video. So if you're interested in digging in more or feel like there are kind of some questions or different topics that we didn't get into in this conversation, the forums cover a lot of those topics. So I would encourage you to go and check those out as well. So I will say, welcome, Michael. Thank you again for joining us. And maybe I'll just give you, I guess I'll maybe introduce myself quickly. My name is DesRoches. I'm with the Kingfield Neighborhood Association, and I'm the board chair. Michael, would you like to kind of introduce yourself?
Yeah.
And maybe give a quick introduction on why you're running for a school board seat.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Dueñes. I'm running for the at-large school board seat for Minneapolis Public Schools. And I was drawn to run. I had a lot of parents and community members continually approach me to run because I looked at, in the spring, I looked at the CDD, the big, massive, comprehensive district design. Actually, it was last fall. And it really concerned me, and I started digging more into it, and I started talking to more parents and more teachers and more community members, and then I started working on organizing against the CDD, and then, you know, we sort of ran into the pandemic, and I had a lot of parents ask me to run because of my policy background. I used to be a senior policy analyst on racial disparities and criminal justice in the state, and a lot of my life, my professional career has been dedicated to addressing racial disparities, whether they're in criminal justice, law enforcement, or in higher ed and education, which is my primary focus. So I decided to run, and here I am today, and really have enjoyed meeting people, talking with people, even through Zoom and through some of the meet and greets I've been doing out in the community across the city. And one of the things I've really learned is people really want to talk about the schools. There's a lot of questions right now. There's a lot of questions about children, you know, and we're all dealing with it as adults, but we all know it's different for our kids. And so a lot of people have been wanting to talk more about what is it like for them in their family. So yeah, so we can, you know, I can answer more questions as they come up. And
yeah, for sure. No, thank you again for joining us. Talking kind of a little bit about what you view the role of the school board is, right? Like if you were to be elected, what do you view kind of your role as a director? And maybe as in regards to both the CDD and just generally, like what do you view, like how would you operate and how would you view your kind of role on the board?
Well, boards are set up to be oversight for any organization or a large institution like our Minneapolis Public Schools. And part of that oversight is really seeing the bigger picture and trying to address the larger needs for how the school district grows, how it changes, you know, programming, how does it interact with the community at a broader level, how does it approach working with teachers, working with all the different employees, and all with the big broad goal of educating our children better. And there's been a lot of challenges to that right now. It's the pandemic has really sort of uprooted and caused a lot of additional stress on families. You know, issues of employment that might not have been there before are much more front and center with a lot of families, as is housing and housing insecurity, homelessness. And I live across from a park, and we have 2 encampments in our park until just recently. And where did they go? You know, some of them went to a facility in North Minneapolis, but there's so many more. And another broader question is like, well, what about the children? You know, I was hearing from public health nurses and some other people working with the camps. They didn't see a lot of youth in these encampments, which was good, but it was also troubling because a lot of us were wondering, where are they? We know there are kids and we know there are children, and what's going on with them? Where are they? And we don't have a really good answer for that. We know they're somewhere. And, the best assumption, best guess right now is that families are moving their children from relative to relative, friend to friend as a way to give them some sort of stable housing while the parents are themselves homeless. But it's a really disconcerting question, because issues of a digital divide between those in coming from lower economic families, and do they have the facilities? And I saw children in my encampment, and if they had a Chromebook, where are they going to get it charged? Where are they going to recharge it once it's done? And so there are a lot of questions about how do we address that. And I've kind of wandered off the topic, but as a board member, it's really raising these larger questions that need to be asked and might not get asked because certain advocates aren't in the room. Homelessness, housing insecure families, what's going on with their education? And then we can look at another special ed, students with learning disabilities, which I prefer to use. What's going on with them? And the CDD didn't have any plan for them initially. And then early this summer, there was some attempt to begin to address learning disabilities for students and what would happen to them. But these are all really big issues. So what's going to happen with them? There's also additional overlays with, it's a big, massive reorganization of the district. So is the budget accurate? Are we going to be able to finance this change that the superintendent is putting through? Then the other part of it is, are we going to be able to sustain the plan once it's in place? Then the other issues of, board policy requires that we do an equity audit. It's called an EDIA, to really assess the impact of any major change in the district, and the CDD, redoing the district boundaries for schools and moving students around. That's a massive undertaking. And so really, according to board policy, needs the equity impact assessment, which is, how is this going to impact our students of color, BIPOC students? How is it going to impact our students with learning disabilities? How is it going to impact our students with who are housing insecure? And all these really large questions. It becomes more of an issue for oversight because equity and wanting equity is really important. There's laws regulating it, and everyone knows that Minneapolis has some of the worst racial disparities in the country right now. But other broader questions about being on a board is making sure the district doesn't make mistakes that come back to hurt the district and hurt the students. One of those is around special ed, students with learning disabilities. Those aren't just district policies, these are actually state and federal laws and regulations that need to be honored. And when I looked at the CDD, what struck me right away, besides that there's nothing in there to really address improving equity and reducing racial disparities in the classroom, there is nothing in there, and there was nothing in there about students with special ed, with an IEP, with learning disability, which was extremely troublesome. I mean, I've been a dean, I've been a faculty member. I started working with learning disability centers early on in my teaching career, and it's really important. And they help me understand why, because it's not just doing the right thing for students who have the right to their education, it's respecting the law and honoring the law so we aren't fined later on. Individual instructors could be targeted for that, but really it's the institution that holds the responsibility. And so with the CDD and this massive reorganization, to not have really concrete protection for students with learning disabilities that are required by federal and state law is extremely troublesome. It opens up the district to a tremendous lawsuit in the future. And it still hasn't been addressed.
Do you think that is partially to do to like the structure? Like, I think of like in a planning sense, right? Like a master plan, right? Like maybe doesn't dig down into all of the details. Like, how do you view the CDD in terms of its like what it should be providing to like the district or like staff who are going to be implementing it, right? Is it kind of this like document that is like, this is the vision, now go out and like accomplish it, like while meeting all of the laws and things? Or do you view it as more of like kind of this like step-by-step guide that should include those details? Like where would you fall on a document?
So there's a real big fallacy about what the CDD should be, and in terms of it can just be a broad plan that guides us moving forward. Large institutions don't create these broad plans that are going to impact how day-to-day teaching is going to be done, day-to-day business is going to be done. It has to be thought through from start to finish. It's a massive citywide plan, essentially, for our children. And you cannot have loosely defined goals, which are in the plan. You cannot have loosely defined plans. You need a step, you need timelines. And I've overseen I oversaw Minnesota statewide research project on racial disparities in our legal and criminal justice system across the entire state. One of the things we did there is we really had to go into different communities and work with different stakeholders, everyone from the beat cop to people who had been pulled over and charged with a crime and then didn't pay their fine, and then were dealing with the consequences of that, to lawyers, to probation officers, to families that were impacted by crime, or how do we help people who have been in prison reintegrate back into neighborhoods. But it's a really large undertaking, and we're looking at educating 36,000 students. It's a huge number of students, and all different economic levels, all different races, all different skill sets. And we really need to have a concrete plan for how these work. Because if you don't, there's transportation issues that are just pure logistical that cannot be left to the last minute. Mm-hmm. There's how do we renovate buildings, which can't be left to the last minute. It's like starting a massive construction project, because that's what the district is doing. And it's going to be over $400 million to renovate all these buildings, they said. But on top of that, it was just that number isn't based on any accurate information that any of us can find in the CDD plan. Board members have asked for, where did you get the quote for renovating buildings to move middle school students into elementary schools, elementary students into middle schools? Because you have to change everything from the height of the toilet to the height of the water fountain to the height of the whiteboard. I'm showing my age there. Yeah. But it's all these like big things you have to account for, and they're not small, and they cost a lot of money. Science classrooms are required for all middle school students, and they're extremely expensive to build, and the district's going to have to build a lot more science rooms. After building science rooms are going to have to be dismantled for elementary school students now. And so there's a lot of costs. So we asked, where did the costs come from? And they never said, including to board members asking direct questions in board meetings, which is really unacceptable, because a board member cannot do their oversight without getting these answers. So the question is, did your own employees draft the number for you? Let's see their estimate for how much they said it would cost to renovate all these buildings in the district for the plan. Did you get an outside contractor to give you an estimate? Where is it? Let's see it. Who did you contact to do it? These are very basic questions, and when you undergo any massive plan, they have to be answered. I tell people, if I had written a grant application using the shoddy data and supporting information, it would get turned down. If I went to a loan on my own and said, this is my business plan, it would have been thrown out because the data is not there to support it. And it's really troublesome, because the board has approved it, the administration and the district has approved it, but there's all these massive questions. For example, when they finally ran the 5-year plan for what is the budget going to show in 5 years if we undertake this plan as it is. And we tried to get them to do that all spring, and then they finally did it in the summer, and the cost was projected to be $527 million, which moved the district into a red flag warning, which meant that it was going to have to require the Minnesota Department of Education to approve bonding bills. And then overnight, that number dropped down to the 400-some million that we have today. And a board member asked the question, what happened? Is a building not going to be renovated? Is a gym not going to be built? What? No answer. So there's no accountability there. And one of the main jobs of any board member is to really hold their institution, in this case, the school district, accountable. Schools are extremely expensive for taxpayers, and in Minnesota and Minneapolis, we willingly pay a lot of money for the best education we can get for our children. But when we have hundreds of millions of dollars unaccounted for, it opens the district up again to a potential lawsuit, because it's a massive discrepancy. And if the construction begins and the money's not there to finish, because it was an inaccurate estimate, those buildings won't be finished renovating, which means they're going to be stuck in limbo. And then what does that do? So these are really huge issues in the district. And, so there's that part. So what kind of happens with oversight? But these questions need to be asked, because it's the board member's responsibility, and it's the district's responsibility to answer it. And if they can't answer it, it's to say, we don't have the answer, we're going to let you know next week. It's very basic management and governance, and it's really disconcerting, because we have elected officials, and these are elected positions, and it's public tax money, and it's I keep saying I'm very worried about it, because I am, because what I see is a plan that's going to start and it won't be able to finish just the building renovations required, because the numbers don't appear accurate. And that's just one example.
Yeah, what do you view as like the path forward? Like, is obviously you're somebody who like isn't supportive of the CDD has been kind of like, we're trying to like call out some of the things that you've just kind of explained. If you're elected, right? Like, what do you view as like your ways to influence the plan and the implementation of the plan to kind of fit more of the vision that you would like to see of a comprehensive plan like
Well, I
this?
think what's really clear is we need more budget transparency and accountability. That's one. The other is that we have a massive racial disparity in the district, and the opportunity gap of how students of color, BIPOC students, perform academically versus their white peers, white students. And how are we going to tackle that? Because that's one of the foundational languages in the text and goals of doing all this massive reorganization of the district, is to bring equity. But the equity is really just kind of housed in these buildings, as opposed to what's inside the buildings. So it's been really nice that we have ethnic studies, but I heard from a student that a middle school lost their ethnic studies program, when that's supposed to be something the district's going to be doing. But it's going to be focused in the high schools, which is good. But as someone who used to teach Chicano Latino studies and ethnic studies in college, I'm very aware of the cost for implementing an ethnic studies curriculum. And I don't know all the numbers, but I know that we have to bring certain people in to help us figure those out. And when I look at the plan, the only hardcore funding that's dedicated to closing the opportunity gap is ethnic studies, but it's only enough to bring it into 2 or 3 schools, period. So it can't go across the district. And then the school board which I was glad about, they're going to require an ethnic studies graduation requirement. That's wonderful. It's something a lot of us have been pushing for years, but the problem is there's no budget for it. It's an unfunded mandate, which is very, very troublesome when you think about principals trying to run their schools and the district trying to implement it. There's no money for hiring teachers. There's no money for hiring community partners to work on the curriculum. And that's all very basic things that are needed to enact that plan. I would like to see more dedicated funding for closing the opportunity gap. So I want to see funding set aside for ethnic studies, dedicated funding. The other thing is, well, what do we do with this plan? Part of it is the stakeholders were never really listened to. They claim to have dozens of hours of input. When we go into the community, we ask people who were in those meetings. Most of them felt that they listened to us, but they didn't write any notes, and they never addressed any of our concerns. And for a plan that's been in place, been developed for over 3 years, according to the district, they should be not just in measuring their community reach out in dozens of hours, it should be in hundreds of hours, if not thousands, over 3 years, because you're trying to identify what's going to get in the way of implementing your plan. What are you not aware of that needs to happen for the plan to occur? And is the plan going to do what you want? And you really need a lot of input from a lot of different people to see what you can't see when you're creating these plans. And that wasn't done. The teachers union wasn't rolled into any of the planning. The principals say they weren't involved in any of the planning. And that's like the easiest thing you can do in a school district is reach out to your principals, bring them together and say, this is the plan we want to do, or we're thinking about doing. What do you think? And just get their feedback. Bringing in the teachers union, which is very organized, and you don't have to meet with all of them. You can start with just the teachers union leadership and see what they have to say, and then begin to move forward. But that wasn't done, and it's just really frustrating. And then it makes me wonder if they wouldn't reach out to these groups, principals and teachers, would even reach out to their own maintenance personnel in their operations office to say, can we undergo this massive renovation of all our buildings? These are old buildings for the most part. Are they filled with asbestos and lead that's going to have to get removed? That's extremely expensive. What is going to take to get them up to code? These are all extremely expensive, and your operations staff, they know, because they're going in the buildings and they see the repairs they have to make. They see the repairs that keep getting put off, and they're the best source of information for a project like this on just dealing with the, $400 million in operations costs to really address just the building renovation itself. So these are really big questions, and it's like, where is this input? It should be right here on this plan that you've laid out. And if it's not there and you don't want to go to your operations staff, who's the equivalent outside of the district that you went to give you those numbers? And that's not there. And it's really baseline strategic planning that's not being done. And so, I sort of harp on these points because you can't have a big, massive reorganization of a school district without concrete steps and plans. And they might wish it could be done, but what's going to happen, what always happens with plans like that, is they never finish. And a lot of things happen, a lot of errors that are very expensive, either in money or time or resources, that all could have been avoided or at least addressed early on. But that's just not going on. And so it's a really big concern because it's this issue of oversight. Once again, I keep coming back to that. And then when we think about, one of these other areas of, when we look at a big, massive plan like that, they were going to reduce initially language immersion seats, which is like one of the best ways to learn a foreign language and one of the best ways for non-English speakers to gain academic English skills. And what we know from those students on both sides in that classroom, English speaker and non-native English speakers, is that their academic test scores are amazing compared to their peers who don't have that type of education. And so it's something we should have been increasing. And thankfully what happened is the CDD is now changed, and what we're seeing is Sheridan, which is up in the Northeast, is expanding by 70% for their immersion program, which is great. We're going to lose some seats in the South, like 20%, 22%, I think. But the bigger issue is we don't even need to lose any seats right now because all the immersion programs have long waiting lists. There's actually enough demand to create another program or to build up Sheridan and have plans to implement a new immersion school in the future. That would help keep students in the district because families are leaving to get Spanish immersion or Chinese immersion. So there's some of these bigger questions about, so real quick, why is this important? So we have 36,000 students going to Minneapolis Public School in Minneapolis, and we have a third of our students going to a non-Minneapolis public school, either a charter school primarily, or outside into one of the suburban schools or a private school. Now it's really important because each student brings roughly $20,000 of income revenue into the school district when they're enrolled here. When they're not here, we don't have that revenue. That's one of the big questions. If we had more students, it wouldn't be an issue. So one of the things I like to say that an older retired former school administrator, told me is that 20,000 students times $20,000 is $400 million. I think it's 400 million. And that would solve almost all of the budget crisis in the school district right now. So how do we grow the district back up again so it can have a healthy budget and prosper?
One of the questions that I had for you after the forum and hearing you talk a little bit about that, is there excess, this is just my kind of not completely understanding, is there excess room in the district right now, right? Like, are we not filling all the seats? Because I think like, oh, we bring back more students, we need another building, or we need more teachers, right? Like how would that work in terms of like the budget, and bringing back more students?
Well, having more students would let us have more revenue to actually, open up a school building that's been closed right now. We have school buildings that are closed right now, and our district has shrunk quite a bit from where it used to be at the top of its, at the highest enrollment levels. Over the last 12 years, we've gone from losing, I think it was 18% of our students to non-public school, Minneapolis schools, to fully a third just in the last 12 years. And that's corresponding to the current board leadership primarily. There's a lot of reasons for it, but part of what we do know is that students are leaving because their families want outside educational opportunities. One of the things that could be done is like you go all over the city, every racial ethnic group, every economic level group in the city, they all want immersion learning, foreign language available for their children. And North Minneapolis has been underserved and underfunded for quite a long time, and a lot of parents left to pull their children out. They felt like they weren't getting programming they wanted. There was a lot of disappointment with the huge suspension rates of African American boys in the district, which is national news. We had the worst rate of suspension of African American boys, and families voted with their feet, and the district didn't listen to them. There were a lot of warning signs beforehand that families and students and teachers tried to tell the rest of us that this is a big issue, and we didn't listen. And part of being a board member is really finding what are the larger issues going on in the district and then getting the district to address them. That's part of the accountability. I've pledged to go to a different school in the district every week if I'm elected, to really learn about their programs, what's working for them, what do they need more, what would help them educate their students better or get more students to come to their school. Mm-hmm. What are obstacles that get in the way of them educating? Mm-hmm. And each school is going to be unique. There'll be some commonalities, some common threads, but each school is serving a different part of the city, geographically, other reasons, and so it's like, well, what does this school need to thrive? Like, so if we take a school in North Minneapolis, what they need to thrive might be different than what a school in Southwest needs to thrive. And some people will say, well, Southwest has been getting what they need. It's one of the reasons why they're thriving. Mm-hmm. And so the effort of the board is really just to get the superintendent to say, what are you going to do to get North Minneapolis schools to thrive again? Mm-hmm. And that's really sitting down with educators and principals on the north side. It's sitting down with community stakeholders, and then doing the long work of rebuilding the reputation of Minneapolis public schools as a good, safe place for families to educate their children. And so that's part of the, sorry, I keep coming back to this. Well, what is the role of the board? Why do I want to be on the board? And I think I have some, I think I can help facilitate that. I've worked with getting a lot of people in the room and coming up with a common goal that we could achieve. And if you talk about racial disparities in criminal justice, trying to sit down with law enforcement and advocacy groups against police brutality and finding a solution and then trying to move towards it, that's real similar to what's going to be happening on a school board, which is bringing people into the room who have very different ideas about what's the best education for their children and our children, and what are we going to do. Part of my approach has always been to bring the best research in, make decisions that are based on data, on real examples. So we don't have to worry about, well, what are the best teaching methodologies for working with BIPOC students of color? We have really good ideas now. We just need to implement them. So it's working on that end where how can I help bring in best practices into the district at all levels, and I can talk about education. How do we get the teachers and the principals and the families and the support staff in a building to really unite behind a few ideas that we know work and that they think will work in their school, more importantly. Not me telling them what they need to do. It's, what do you think out of all these choices we have will work in your school? And then why? And then really sort of working through, maybe the first three answers aren't going to work, but it gets everyone talking, and eventually a group can really begin to come to a consensus. So those are some of the ideas.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of in your earlier statement, talking a little bit about the encampments and folks experiencing homelessness, living in the parks, and then kind of tying this back to kind of the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. How do you see MPS's role changing in the city after all of these things? And how do you see the board director role changing? What are some things that you think MPS should be doing to kind of respond to some of these specific, really traumas in our community that are happening?
Yeah, and it's that's why, I mean, when I started this, it wasn't, the pandemic hadn't hit when we were thinking about what does the district need to do. I mean, we always knew they needed to support students and families, but it's really pivoted now in my campaign to how do we support students and families in crisis, and things need to be done differently. Or maybe they don't need to be done differently, but they need to be done in a more authentic way. How do we listen to these families? How do we really hear what they're trying to tell us that is getting in the way of their children's education, and figure out how do we as a school district address that? So one of the ways I always prefer is, like, I learned this lesson early on in my career, which was, I don't need to have all the answers. And anyone who claims they have all the answers is going to be wrong. What you want is someone who can bring people in who will have answers, or can get us to the answers and has a plan for getting us to the answers. So one of the things I like to sort of always advocate for is, well, if we want to know what's going on with homelessness and housing insecurity and how it's impacting our students, we need to bring in their advocates. We need to bring them in also, these families, and have, sort of begin to build a relationship where there's trust, where they can really talk and share with us. I have a friend who's a public health nurse working in the encampments, and it's, she shared a really sad story of a mother who was going to every encampment in the city, looking in every tent and every encampment to try to find her son. And it's heartbreaking. But what we see there is that, people don't give up on their children. They have tremendous amount of reserves to really try to do what's right for their kids. And I don't have a happy answer for that story about what happened. I still don't know, but it really left an impact on me. And so let's bring in public health professionals. I mean, public health nurses who are working with the homeless encampments. Let's bring in their advocacy groups, and it's, what is the district going to do to meet our federally mandated requirement to provide education for our children in this district, and then we can begin to work on figuring that out together. Students, principals, I hear of principals going above and beyond all the time, just like I hear about teachers and support staff in school buildings, which is trying to help these students, all the students they can, as best they can. And I think what we really need to do is find a way to support that effort, and actually listen to people instead of us thinking we know what's best. So
Yeah.
that's an example.
No, that's great. It's kind of maybe changing topics a little bit and talking about kind of the school district and the board's role and relationship with the teachers union. I guess how have you seen that kind of operate in the past, and what would be kind of your either what good things would you continue on, or what kind of a different approach would you take with the teachers union, and specifically as it relates to, I think maybe generally and specifically as it relates to kind of coming back from distance learning and thinking about COVID.
Yeah. So, um, these are unsettled times. I mean, we're in crisis right now with the pandemic and the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. Uh, and it's caused a lot of disruption to families, to people in the city. And so one of the things I've really been advocating for, and I'll continue advocating for, is that the district needs to work with all the major stakeholders. And the teachers union is one of the largest major stakeholders in the district. And we have to meet with them regularly. I mean, that's not wasn't going on during the planning phase of the CDD, about the CDD. And I've pledged separately that I'll meet with the teachers union and the other unions once a month to listen to them. And I plan to do that. And the reality is, if I do get elected, the districts and our city is in such crisis right now, that'll probably have to be more, and I'm willing to do that. But the other part is, when we think about coming back into the classroom, there's a lot of mistrust, and that's built up over time. And it's not just this year, and it's not just this administration. It goes back further than that. It goes back earlier than this board. So really what needs to be done is, there's a lot of people worried, and a district making decisions without being transparent raises fear in other people who have reasons to distrust the school, whether it's the teachers union and the current, how they weren't included in the CDD planning, whether it's families who felt their concerns weren't listened to by the district when it came to all sorts of issues. But part of how we rebuild that, and part of my role on the board, would really be to say, what we're doing now isn't working. And so we have to work on a process to regain the public trust, regain the trust of our employees, regain the trust, more importantly, of our families who trust us with their children in these schools. And part of doing that, with being transparent, is the district accepting that it doesn't know the best answers. And even if they did say they do, I doubt it, because the nurses who are employed in the schools aren't getting the information they need to be prepared for what's going to happen when everyone comes back into the classroom. And the nurses in the building are really the first people who need to know the most, because they're going to be entrusted with the health of that building. But we bring back in public health professionals. We reach out and say, we're going to create a public health team to help guide the district into a workable plan for bringing students safely back into the classroom and bringing employees safely back into the classroom. Because without trust, parents aren't going to trust us to send their kids into the building. Mm-hmm. And that's a bigger problem. And then we have employees. If employees don't feel safe in that environment, that's going to be a problem. You can't work effectively if you're worried about your safety, no matter how much you care for people and your students. And that's always going to be an issue. And then there's the whole safety and the morality of it. Do we care enough for our employees and our students and their families to do this the best way possible? And I recognize I don't have that answer. No one on the school board is a medical professional. And I don't know of anyone in the district administration who's a medical professional. They could be wrong about that. But it's recognizing where we're weak, and that's one area. And everyone's struggling with this, and one of the ways we deal with it is being very transparent and showing people that we're trying to do it the best way possible. And if they don't trust us as the school district or us as the teachers union, chances are they're going to trust these public health professionals much more. And then that's one way that the district can work at rebuilding trust again in families and employees.
Cool. No, great. With the last couple minutes that we have left, one of the questions we got from kind of a community member, and I don't know if you want to take all of these, but maybe it's describe an ideal school day for a third grader, a seventh grader, and a 10th grader.
Wow.
So maybe pick one, or if you want to talk maybe more generally about an ideal, what you kind of see, kind of that personal, that experience that a student is having in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It's also really tough. It's, I think I'm fortunate. My son's been in third and seventh, and he's in ninth grade now. But uh, I think as opposed to what would I want to see or what would be the perfect day, I come back to relationships a lot, because when students feel engaged in the school, in their classroom, they're going to do well. And when they feel safe to talk to an adult in the school that they trust, uh, chances are they're going to do better. And how do we create this engagement? How do we create this trust? And principals have lots of ideas about this. Teachers do as well. But one of the ways is really sort of addressing some of these basic needs of students, which is they want to learn, they want to do well. Some of them struggle, but really it's trying to grasp on to the fact that they really want to learn. They want to do better. And school is a safe place for a lot of students, or it's a safer place. And really working with that, and then finding out what will it take for that student to become more engaged in their school day, in their classroom. For some, it might be a specific class. For others, it might be having time with their friends to share. And when we sort of think about coming out of COVID here, when the pandemic, when our quarantining ends and distance learning ends, that's going to be huge for students. And how are we going to be able to build upon that and help the teachers and help the students and help the school as this broader community to really foster and maintain those relationships? So what I really want to see is students coming into a school they want to be at and feeling like they're getting something from being there, and then engaging them more with, is it extracurriculars? Extracurriculars are taking a big hit, have decreased over time across the district. And how do we know that's how students get engaged? There's a club they want to be a part of. There's a group they want to participate in. There's a sport they want to be active in. There's music, and there's language. There's all these ways that students want to be engaged. And if we can tap into that, other good things will follow for that student. So,
No,
I mean, it's not an ideal day, but the other thing I would put in there, an ideal day, is what I was lucky enough in my childhood, which was actually a true recess.
Yeah.
I tell my son I had a recess in the morning, and I had a recess in the afternoon, and I had lunch.
Yeah.
And it blows my child's mind and all his friends.
Yeah.
And I needed that. I needed to run around. I needed to just sit and talk with my friends. But now that's one of the things that we've taken away from our children in their school day. And it's not just us, it's happened across the country. But really what I would look for is those moments for students to really be connected with their classmates and with teachers and other adults in the school. So it's not that's what I want to see for an ideal school day. They want to be there, they want to go to the class, and they get a break, to let off steam and to recenter, refocus.
Awesome. No, that's
There we
great.
go.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, and I also was a kid who very much needed recess. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot of people do, especially boys.
Yeah. Well, good. We're at time right now, so maybe I'll give you kind of a last, maybe 30 seconds to a minute to kind of just maybe closing remarks, or talk a little bit about kind of what your maybe top priority or what would be kind of coming up if you were elected to the school board.
Yeah, so part of what really my top priorities are supporting students and families in crisis right now. This is not normal times for anyone. These are not normal times for everyone. And how do we support one another through this? The other part is really bringing, transparency to the budget, because if we know the budget and we can trust the budget, we can make plans and we can find ways to finance those plans. And then really addressing equity with not unfunded mandates like a graduation requirement that doesn't have any funding tied to it. putting money from the budget directly to address the opportunity gap, so it doesn't change. And then finally, the last point is really about finding out why families leave the district and give them something to come back to. Is it creating immersion programs? Is it doing something else? And I think one of the things right now I would like to see is more creativity and thinking of what schools do in the community. I came from a rural background. The local community would help finance all the athletic facilities for a school. But what it did was it opened up those facilities to the community, to the neighborhood. So I go see my mom in rural Wisconsin, and my son could go run on the track anytime we're there. Here in Minneapolis, all the tracks are locked up. So it's, how do we think about creating community and support right now? And one of my supporters, she had said, who works in public health, is, can we open up these facilities, especially with winter, so that our kids and our community can be close to one another but still distance, and be in a safe environment while we exercise a bit and grow our community, still maintain a relationship with people. So I love that.
No, that's great, and I think that's something we were just talking about earlier as a neighborhood association too. Just how we can find other organizations that kind of have these spaces and come together to kind of create community. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're really blessed here because there's a lot of goodwill, and there's a lot of organizations, and if you have people that are organized, it's a lot easier to bring people together through those organizations and leverage all the wealth of experience in our communities to build our communities up.
Totally. Well, that is our time. I think we even ran a little bit over, but
okay.
That's I guess I'll just say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for those who are watching and have watched both of kind of our interviews. And again, thank you, Michael, for joining us, and good luck coming up in next Tuesday. So
yeah, thank you very much.